So something that's not really gone over in Fallout 4 at all is the fact that the player can equip their settlers with weapons and armor. On the one hand, this is good because your settlers aren't just stuck with their same old pipe pistols. But on the other hand, it can be difficult to figure out which items are the best to equip to your settlers. And in today's video, I'd like to go over what I think are among the top guns and weapons to equip to your settlers in Fallout 4. Now before we start, I want to go ahead and mention that while settlers can be fairly effective when given the proper weapons, I would highly recommend that you always combine them with some defensive turrets. This is because defensive turrets are generally better at defending your settlements than just having a group of well-equipped settlers. It's also important to mention that in 90% of cases that settlers will have infinite ammo regardless of what weapons you give them. And all you really need to do is give them one bullet for the corresponding weapon that you want them to equip, or the one grenade that you intend for them to use during combat, and they'll do all the rest. But I guess without further ado, these will be the top 9 best guns and weapons for equipping to settlers in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 9, the automatic pipe rifle. Now, early on in your playthrough, there's not really any reason not to equip all of your settlers with automatic pipe rifles. While it's true that they're nowhere near as powerful as any of the other entries on this list, automatic pipe weapons are easy to upgrade and the ammo required to use them is extremely common. In fact, you should be able to outfit all of your settlers at Sanctuary Hills as soon as you rescue Preston from the raiders at Concord at the very beginning of the game. And you're also not going to find anything that's far superior to the automatic pipe pistol or rifle in sufficient enough quantities until you start regularly encountering gunners, which usually have some of the better weapons like combat rifles or assault rifles. There's also the fact that automatic pipe weapons can be modified into rifles. In some of my tests, I've noticed that your settlers will attempt to keep their distance from enemies when they're equipped with rifles. Conversely, when you equip those same settlers with pistols, your settlers tend to move closer to enemies, potentially putting them in further danger of getting hurt or even killed. But for the most part, automatic pipe rifles are good simply because they're so plentiful early on, and they're generally really good early on in the game. But once you get further on in the game and you gain access to better weapons, you're going to want to equip your settlers with something better. Number 8, the minigun. Like automatic pipe weapons, the minigun is a weapon that's especially good early on in your playthrough, and while the base damage of the minigun is lacking, the minigun ends up being really great early on because it has such a high rate of fire, and the ability to attack so many times per second makes up for the low damage, as most low-level enemies don't really have all that much health to begin with. As I just pointed out though, while the minigun does have a high rate of fire, the problem is that the minigun's damage is just too low. And for this reason, you're going to start noticing that the minigun becomes less effective the further you go south on the map. Because not only are you dealing with the lower damage, but enemies appear at higher levels with more health and also tend to have better resistances, also further making the minigun less effective. Plus, finding miniguns in high enough quantities to equip to your settlers is very difficult. You either have to get really lucky and find them on super mutants or at key locations. Alternatively, I guess you can build them provided that you have the Contraptions DLC, but that's not going to be really practical since you need to be at least level 24 with the proper perk investment. Still, if you can find them, I would recommend that you just acquire a couple of these and give them to some of your settlers in Sanctuary Hills, Red Rocket, or Abernethy Farm, because between the defensive turrets that you can build and these minigun-equipped settlers, you should have few problems defending these areas. Number 7, the Fragmentation Grenade. Now, if you're towards the beginning of the game, or even if you're in the mid to late game and you're looking for a good grenade to equip to your settlers, this is pretty much it. not only is the standard frag grenade insanely common, but it's also got relatively low crafting requirements and can be purchased almost anywhere. And I would also say that if you plan on equipping your settlers with anything at all, at least equip them with a couple of fragmentation grenades, as they're effectively infinite provided that you give them just one. Plus, grenades can potentially deal a fair amount of damage to would-be threats, so they're worth equipping to your settlers if you have them. While there are definitely better grenades out there, and I'll be going over some of those shortly, I highly recommend you equip your settlers with these until you can reliably acquire some of the better grenade types. Number 6. The Radium Rifle. While you will need the Far Harbor DLC in order to equip your settlers with the Radium Rifle is an excellent weapon to use up against enemies with low radiation resistance. This is because the radiation damage that's dealt by the Radium Rifle reduces the enemy's maximum health in addition to damaging them normally. So if a human enemy attacked your settlement and tried to heal using a stim pack after shooting them with a radium rifle, they wouldn't be able to recover to their full maximum health that they normally started the fight with, thus making them a little bit more vulnerable. With this said, I've noticed that the radium rifle does have a bit of a tendency to struggle against enemies with higher radiation resistance. For example, you might have a group of settlers that may have a harder time up against super mutants or ghouls, as these enemies generally have higher radiation resistances and are somewhat immune to radiation damage. There's also the fact that radium rifles are fairly uncommon and can really only be acquired in the Far Harbor DLC, so fielding an entire settlement with radium rifles may actually be a little bit impractical. Still, it might be a good idea to at least equip 2 or 3 settlers in one of your more frequently attacked settlements with radium rifles. At the very least, they will definitely weaken some of the human gunners and raiders that could possibly end up attacking you. Number 5. The Plasma Grenade. So the Plasma Grenade is twice as strong as the Fragmentation Grenade. However, instead of dealing just double the damage, the Plasma Grenade deals a combination of explosive and energy damage, and this can prove to be fairly useful if the enemies that are attacking your settlements have high damage resistance, as most enemies that have high damage resistance generally don't have extremely high energy resistance. However, the major advantage the Plasma Grenade has over something better is that the Plasma Grenade can be crafted, is frequently sold by in-game merchants, and like better grenades, the Plasma Grenade can also be acquired through the iBot settlement object that was added in Fallout 4's Automatron DLC. And this relative ease of acquisition makes Plasma Grenades very practical for the mid to late game, where other, perhaps more powerful grenades end up being more difficult to acquire, or there are simply just not enough of them in the game to actually make them practical to equip to your settlers. But if you're looking for what I would consider to be the most practical and powerful grenade to equip to settlers, I think the Plasma Grenade is it. Number 4. The Handmade Rifle. So without a doubt, the best ballistic rifle to potentially equip to your settlers is the Handmade Rifle. Now, handmade rifles are extremely common in the Nuka World DLC, and you can loot a bunch of them off of the local Nuka World gang members. In fact, if you decide to turn on the Nuka World gangs and start the open season side quest, you should be able to easily come across 50 or more handmade rifles that you can use for your settlers. So if you ask me, obtaining the weapons and acquiring the necessary ammo for your settlers isn't necessarily the problem. What is the problem is the fact that the handmade rifle has some very high upgrade requirements. Not only do you need a lot of valuable materials, but you also need to have the corresponding weapon perks for certain upgrades. For example, in order to upgrade your handmade rifle with the best automatic receiver, you need to max out the commando perk. And this is okay if you've got an automatic weapons build for your character already, but if you specialized in either rifleman or gunslinger, you may have some problems with using the handmade rifle for your settlers. Otherwise, assuming you can fulfill the requirements, the handmade rifle is the best ballistic rifle that you can equip to your settlers. Number 3. The Nuka Grenade. Now, the Nuka Grenade is the most powerful grenade in vanilla Fallout 4. And for the sake of comparison, the potential explosive damage dealt by this grenade is double that of the standard fragmentation grenade. However, sort of like how the plasma grenade deals explosive and energy damage, the nuker grenade can also deal some radiation damage, which will further reduce the maximum health of enemies that have low radiation resistance. But I think the best part about the nuker grenade is that it has the potential to simply knock some enemies over, giving your settlers some free shots on those enemies. The one major problem with using this grenade, though, is that it's quite rare. While you can acquire them reliably with the iBot pod settlement object that was added with the Automatron DLC, if you don't have this DLC, there isn't a particularly great way to get these in high enough quantities to equip entire settlements with it. And for that reason, the plasma grenade may actually end up being the superior option at that point. Otherwise, if you have the Automatron DLC and you don't mind using the iBot pod, the nuker grenade is definitely worth getting for at least a couple of your settlers at your settlements. And if you're willing to put the time in, you can equip an entire settlement with these, and they'll have little issue dealing with most threats. Number 2, the plasma rifle. So when it comes to automatic rifles in Fallout 4, the plasma rifle easily has some of the highest damage per shot available and is arguably the best of the bunch. Sort of like the plasma grenade, you're dealing a combination of ballistic damage as well as energy damage per shot. And to give you some idea, the ballistic portion of the plasma rifle alone exceeds or rivals the base damage of something like the assault rifle or the combat rifle, and the energy damage portion actually rivals the laser rifle. So again, you're sort of getting the best of both worlds in just one gun. However, the plasma rifle does have its fair amount of downsides. Now, while you can purchase plasma rifles, they're fairly uncommon out in the wild, meaning that it's likely that you're going to end up using the plasma weapons that you find rather than equipping them to your settlers. Fortunately though, thanks to the fact that settlers only require 1 ammo to use the weapon that they have equipped, you actually may find that it's cheaper to equip your settlers with plasma rifles than to use them yourself. But if you are looking for the best automatic rifle for your settlers, I think that the plasma rifle is it. And finally, number 1, the Gatling laser. So the best way to describe the Gatling laser is that it's basically just a far more powerful version of the minigun. And unlike the minigun, which only caps out at 10 damage per shot, you can get the Gatling laser to deal anywhere up to 24 damage per shot without the charging barrels. And with the charging barrels, you can get this thing to go as high as 66 damage per shot, though at the expense of some of your rate of fire. The only problem with the Gatling laser is that it's expensive and it might be a little impractical to equip an entire settlement with Gatling lasers. But still, if you could get about 2 or 3 for each settlement, I think you'll find that your settlers should be able to chew through most threats fairly easily, especially if they're backed up by settlers with other equipped weapons and some defense turrets. In my opinion though, I think that the Gatling laser is the best weapon for settlers in Fallout 4, and assuming you could have everyone in your settlement equipped with a Gatling laser, and you also had them equipped with either a nuker grenade or a plasma grenade, your settlers are going to be a force to be reckoned with. But alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.